This is World Insight. I'm Tian Wei. The fact that the last Cold War did not destroy the human race had a lot to do with the security treaties reached among countries, particularly those on nuclear security. But things apparently are changing dramatically recently, with the U.S. President Donald Trump provokingly announced a withdrawal from the Intermediate Range Nuclear Forces Treaty. Many believe it literally could be the very beginning of a new arms race. Security scholars worldwide are concerned, including Niklas Swanstrom, the director and co-founder of the Institute for Security and Development Policy from Sweden. On the sideline of the Xiangshan Forum earlier held in Beijing, he told me that he's worried about European security situations as a result, and cautiously watching the transatlantic relations. The U.S. withdrawal from one of the most significant strategic arms control deals in the world. As we know, from the end of the Cold War, that's why the deal was signed then, because it's mutually disruptive. The question is, what's next? Because when you scrap off the old, or rather destroy the existing, without a new one, that is the most dangerous period of time. So I'm questioning about this time. How is our time going to be characterized by these kinds of decisions?
Well, I mean, first of all, I think this is, we haven't seen the end of this, of course, but this is in line with what Donald Trump is trying to do. He's very disruptive. He is having a policy of taking these decisions to create sort of insecurity, to renegotiate and trying to get better deals. But if you're going to be very honest, if he can destroy the world 10 times or 50 times or 100 times, in my book, probably once would be sufficient. So this is an extremely unfortunate. And it gives leverage to other states. So if the United States doesn't obey international legislation, why should others do?
Right, sorry.
So I can understand he wants to renegotiate trade deals and all that.
Right.
That's the most of a national interest. But when it comes to arms deals, it has much wider consequences and are much more severe.
So after the U.S. withdrawal from this deal, things would also change, as you may understand. The bigger background has changed.
Yeah. Well, the thing is, it's, the initial demand from DPRK was, of course, that we have no trust.
Yeah.
Now they see evidence of an erratic decision-making process in the United States. So that of course, will trigger it. But this reaches much more broader implications as well. I mean, you come to Japan. What should Japan do? Can Japan, if North Korea now will keep its nuclear weapon, should they have a nuclear weapon? What should Europe do? Can we trust the United States? And personally, I think that we need a stronger intra-European military cooperation that are capable of funding ourselves, preferably in close contact with the United States to NATO. But I think that we have to realize that the United States might not always be at our side. So I do see a much more fend-for-yourself mentality around the world.
But what would that mean for countries like yours, Sweden, or some of the other relatively smaller European countries?
Well, I think that it's going to be discussion of whether or not we need to join NATO. Now most of the smaller states are in NATO. Sweden and Finland is not.
Yes.
But I think this also raises the debate, certainly with a more aggressive Russia under Putin. That has sort of raised the debate, should Finland and Sweden join NATO? And we're not, as a Swede, I'm not very concerned over Russia invading Sweden, but I'm much more concerned over cyber attacks or other attacks on our neighbors, Estonia, Lithuania, etc. So I think this would raise the question, do we need to join NATO? Or can we have enough courage to create a European defense cooperation that actually has muscles?
On the one hand, many of the European countries, Sweden included, having had long-time allied relationship with the United States. But on the other hand, the recent events does raise huge questions about this tradition and about the nature of the United States going forward. What is the best scenario and a plan for countries like yours?
Well, first of all, I think we need to make a distinction with President Trump and the United States.
Yes.
I think the transatlantic link after Donald Trump will go back to more of its normal. It will be affected, of course, but the cooperation...
Is that wishful thinking? You think about him 4 years, probably 8 years. Nobody knows.
No, I think about 8 years. I do think President Trump is very likely to get a second term. And that will affect the relations with Europe. But nevertheless, we do share a lot of commonality. That said, I think what we need to do, and I think what we have to realize that as a small country in Europe, it's increasingly difficult to stand alone. We do need to increase our defense spending, but we also need to increase that regional defense. We need to start acting as the European Union, and which we have, of course, the economic part, but we also need a defense treaty.
And that is very different from NATO.
That is very different from NATO. I think that the Europeans need to learn and realize that we also need to fend for ourselves. And Europe's interest, and this is where I'm a bit critical of Europe, and I'm a very strong European believer, we need to have our own interest. We need to define what does Europe want, and we need to start seeking to get what we want. That's the same with the Belt and Road. We should engage the Belt and Road with our own interest.
Yes.
And that is not the American interest, and that might not be Chinese interest.
Niklas, help us to understand one of the most important things that you're doing, which is about research about the Silk Road, both the ancient Silk Road and the modern version of it.
Well, when we look at it, the trade lines was tremendously important, and the interaction culturally, but also scientifically, was tremendous. And when we look at Central Asia, it was really the cradle of ideas. And I think if we can come back to that and to re-establish a communication, and we were talking about win-win, as President Xi has done, I think this is very important. Not only about winning economic benefits, but also collaborating against research, culture, ideas, values. That, I think, would be a great historical lesson. And I think we can learn a lot from the ancient people. And unfortunately, we don't know our history well enough always.
It's a very selective version that we are reading right now.
It is very selective.
As the historians would say.
Yeah, and we tend to focus on the challenges. And I think we also need to be focusing on the positive. But it was interesting, of course, when the Mongols controlled the region, it was one of the safest routes to travel. There was a large part of security. People could bring down transportation costs. That is not the case anymore. So I think what we also need to focus now is to learn from the history and create that historical security on the ancient Silk Road.
But the question is, do we have enough trust?
True. I mean, the lack of trust is a problem. I don't think we can have that today. There's no such space for one single strong actor guaranteeing it.
You mean country?
A country. I mean, we had, of course, the Mongol guaranteeing the security historically, but what we need to do now is to build trust between Europe, between China, between Russia, and that we collectively can build that security.
And those in Central Asian countries, of course.
Well, Central Asian countries, absolutely. And but there's more trust among the Central Asian states. What we see now is that when they initially became states, they were very distrustful of each other. But we see a regional cooperation. I think that distrust is much more against China, against Russia, against Europe. And they want to keep their independence. So we, as larger entities, has to be able to come in there and be partners.
What is the security aspect of this BRI as we talk about it?
Well, I mean, I'm extremely worried about the soft security threats when it comes to environment, when it comes to economic development. When we look at a lot of the environmental degradation in Central Asia, creates, of course, social instability in these countries. And these are the ones that we need to get together. And I would, of course, like to have a global sort of view on this, but I do think when it comes to that, it is China and it is Europe that will take the main needs to take the main responsibility.
Besides Eurasian Security and the Belt and Road Initiative, Mr. Swanstrom is also a long-time observer of the Korean Peninsula. Big steps have been taken to ease tensions along the two countries' borders, as well as the dismantlement of the DPRK's arsenal of nuclear weapons. Take a look.
It's been a year of firsts for diplomacy on the Korean Peninsula. The two leaders from the north and south have so far met 3 times in April, May, and September. U.S. President Donald Trump and Kim Jong-un met at a historical summit in Singapore in June. Chinese President Xi Jinping met with Kim 3 times in the first half of the year. The DPRK has carried out a moratorium on nuclear and missile tests, dismantling structures at missile test sites. And South Korea and the DPRK have seized hostile acts against each other, held reunions for families separated by the Korean War, and agreed to begin reconnecting rail and road links. South Korean President Moon Jae-in said on Thursday that Kim Jong-un would soon pay a visit to Seoul. Russian President Vladimir Putin is likely to meet Kim very soon, and many expect the second Kim-Trump summit to take place at the end of the year.
What do you make of the latest development about DPRK's desire to negotiate, particularly with the United States this time? Will Pyongyang be able to get what it wants?
I think DPRK has already gotten what it wants.
Which is?
A division of interest. They have had a...
The division of interest started in the 6-party talks. It's been a long time. It's no secret at all.
Well, the thing is ROK and the United States are today very divided. So what we see, the interest of ROK, now they have already engaged North Korea to an extent that is no return back. The United States is not on the train. DPRK has engaged China, and China, United States, China, Russia, and DPRK went out and said, we need to lift the sanctions. We need to give them something.
Right.
So now the international community is very divided on how to deal with DPRK. This gives DPRK an enormous leverage. So the diplomatic development we've seen from the Olympic Games to today has been all in favor of DPRK.
But President Trump is looking at it a very different way. He's looking at it as he's a political legacy in a way, or geopolitical legacy. And likely, as we know, earlier reports suggest that after midterm election, there's likely to be even more summit right after the Singapore summit between Trump and Kim. So it seems that everybody got its share. Everybody got what it wants. Isn't that a wonderful thing?
Well, this is a fantastic thing if you want North Korea to have nuclear weapons. No, I do think what happens now is that...
But North Korea already said they would come clean, right, if they have the guarantee for peace.
Exactly, and security.
Yes, security.
And this is the thing, that if you're going to have the security guarantees that DPRK is asking, the United States has to leave ROK. It has to show that it has no military interest. It has to show it has a normalization of relations. Maybe even has to leave Japan. I mean, these are demands that we're not going to see in the coming 5, 10 years at least. So I think what we're going to facing is really a reduction of test sites, dismantling of test sites, reduction maybe even of long-range ballistic missiles, but we'll see them keeping the nuclear weapons for the foreseeable future.
Having said that, though, I have to let you help us understand really what is happening on the ground, because you've been frequenting DPRK.
Yes.
What you have seen over the past 15 years, what you have seen since the new administration comes into power, what you have seen over the past 1 year particularly, more intense interaction between the North and the South, even the South president visiting the North, giving a speech in the parliament, on the street with President Kim, in the car, waving to the crowds in DPRK. It's something that you have never seen, at least on TV footage. So, Niklas, what exactly is happening? Are things really changing?
It has, everything has changed and nothing has changed in a sense.
Interesting, but very philosophical. I have to figure that out.
Yeah, no, the thing is, Chairman Kim Il-sung, he has changed a lot. He's been very engaging with the international community. He has brought in a new philosophy. His economic policy actually is giving results. When I walk around shops, In Pyongyang, there's more merchandise than has been before, locally produced.
It's not just for foreigners like you.
No, it's not for foreigners. On the countryside, it's different. We have still a huge lack of resources and everything. So there's a thing here between Pyongyang, bigger cities, and countryside. But of course, he is different. But when we're looking at these changes now, we're standing at a crossroad. Either we continue on the old path, that North Korea continues to keep this, they provoke, and then we have international sanctions, and we're back in the same fold.
The same cycle.
Same cycle. But, and I'm quite optimistic, I would give it a 20-25% chance that we will see Kim Jong-un who's saying, listen, I'm actually going to give you some of the nuclear weapons. And he might actually show that constructiveness. And if he does that, we're in a very different cycle. And of course, as you said, we have not seen this sort of engagement before. This is something very optimistic.
You mean the ball is totally in his court? I worry about the other side too, whether the rest of the international community, the United States included, will be really getting constructive attitude in following up the process that we are already beginning, apparently.
I don't think they will offer enough. And I think what the ball is really on the Korean side, North and South, if they can bring this process in a different direction, that's what I think is hopeful. But I would not hold my breath to see a constructive move from Donald Trump. He might do something for the midterm elections, absolutely. But I think if we're going to look at long-lasting, constructive policy, we have to look at the Koreans, North and South.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. If you'd like to see more, try to find us World Insight CGTN into your search engine or check out our YouTube channel. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Sina Weibo. From me, Tian Wei, and everyone on the World Insight team, thanks for watching. Tune in again next time for insights across China and around the world. Good night.